Hello, artists. It's Miss Cycle. Welcome to our new unit. You guys are probably getting used to this by now. We start a new unit and we focus on one of our elements of art. Well, this unit is a little different because we are going to be focused on 3 different elements of art. And those 3 elements of art are space, value, and form. Everybody say them with me. Space, value, and form. Very good. All right. So space is not like outer space. We're not talking about planets or anything like that. We're talking about the space that's within our artwork and how we use the paper to lay out and place all the things that we're gonna draw if we're talking about a drawing. Value has to do with light and dark. So you know when you're coloring with a crayon and you press really hard with all of your gorilla muscles, it gets darker. And if you just go nice and smooth and light with your little mouse muscles, it's gonna be light and dark. And then finally, form. Form is has to do with the different ways that things can be measured. A flat piece of paper can only be measured in 2 directions. It can only be measured how tall it is. It can only be measured how wide it is. Now, instead of a piece of paper, if I had a box, I can measure how tall it is. I can measure how wide it is. I can also measure how far it sticks out. That's depth. That means that this box has 3 dimensions, or it has forms. A square is a flat shape. A cube is a 3-dimensional form. And that's kind of what our project is about, are those first few steps that we artists use to draw 3 dimensions on a flat piece of paper. Now you might be going, oh, Miss Cycle, that's crazy. I can't do that. It's okay. Here we go. We're gonna go over some basics. All right, so one of the first elements I mentioned is space. So let's look at the space on this piece of paper. Let's imagine that on this piece of paper, I'm drawing a big empty field. If you are standing out in a big empty field and there's nothing around, there's no buildings, there's no trees, there's no nothing, you are gonna see one line, and it's a very important line. It's the line where the sky meets the ground, and that is called the horizon line. And artists sometimes draw a horizon line like this. It's a horizontal line. Can you imagine that? So here's my horizon line. Now, I want you to keep imagining that we're standing out in the field. Up here's the sky, and down here's the ground. And I have a soccer ball. And I kick that soccer ball as far as I can. As it travels away from me, my eyes are gonna think that it is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Is it really getting smaller? No, it just looks that way. Things that are close up look big. Put your hand in front of your face. Those fingers look enormous. If you put your hand far away, they look really small. I can do it on my camera. Look at how little my hand is. Now my hand is enormous and it's coming to attack you because it is closer to my camera. So if I had that soccer ball and it was right up here by my foot, it might look like this. If I kick it super far away, did it really shrink? No, it just looks smaller. So that is a trick that we call 1-point perspective. The way that we draw it is kind of connected to the way that we see it in the real world, our perspective. We're going to be learning how to draw cubes today, which are the form versions of squares. And I'm going to show you how that might look. Now, we talked about this horizon line. Now, what I didn't tell you is that there is one point on this horizon line when we use this trick of 1 point perspective, where if I kick that soccer ball even farther, do you know what it's gonna look like? It's gonna look like it disappears, or it might look like that it vanishes. And that is called the vanishing point. Now, as the artist, I can decide where my vanishing point is on my horizon line. It's an imaginary point. It doesn't really exist in the real world, but I just use it to help me to look at the things that I'm gonna draw. So I'm gonna erase my soccer ball, and we're gonna start with a square. Now that square is a shape, what we just learned about, all of our shapes. We're gonna use these tricks to turn this shape into a form. We're gonna use the tricks of space to turn this shape into a form. And we're gonna use that vanishing line to do it. Now, basically, this idea is if this square were actually a three-dimensional box, my eyes are gonna think that that box actually looks smaller the farther away that it is. Now, that's a little hard to think about with a box, but if you think about it with a train, if a train is running right into you, that engine of that train looks really big. But that back of that train looks really small. So maybe we'll think about this box right now as the front of a train. And let's draw the rest of the train as it gets smaller and smaller, the farther and closer it gets to that vanishing point. Now, normally I would use a ruler or a straight edge, but I'm gonna just do it freehand on the board. Boop, ba-doop, ba-doop, ba-doop. One corner to the vanishing point. 2 corner to the vanishing point, 3 corner to the vanishing point. Can you kind of imagine like that's a little choo-choo train chugging along? Those little wheels get smaller and smaller. Well, we're just going to be playing with that idea of the three-dimensional cube as it appears to get smaller and smaller as it goes off in the distance. Don't worry, I'm gonna draw it with you, and you will get to see what it looks like first, and then we will draw it together. The last step that I haven't mentioned yet is this third element of value. And that's the idea of light and dark. And some artists might use different values to make their flat drawings look a little bit more three-dimensional.
So here's a version of what your project might end up looking like this week. It's gonna start out as 3 squares, just like we used in our shape project. So if you have a square template, you might wanna use that to trace your squares. Then we're going to use what we learned this week about space, value, and form to make those squares look like 3D cubes disappearing towards a vanishing point. You are going to need a piece of paper, a square template, a pencil, and a ruler or a straight edge. I am going to start this project by tracing 3 squares, very similarly to how we started our shape project. I'm going to try to spread them out so they aren't super duper close to each other. Remember to not worry too much if your template moves a little or you go too far over one edge. We're working in pencil. You can always adjust and erase. Once I have my 3 squares placed, I'm going to place my vanishing point. My vanishing point should be kind of in a far corner away from my 3 squares. Now I'm going to start to pay attention to the corners of my first square. Using my ruler or my straight edge to connect each corner to the vanishing point. I double check every time that it is lined up before I draw my line. Now this last corner is a weird one. I actually do not connect that corner through because it would make my cube look like it was see-through or invisible. So anytime I would have to draw through my original shape, I just don't do it. So I move down here to connect corner to vanishing point, and I notice this one looks very different from that first one I did. I only connected 2 corners because my back 2 corners would go through the original shape, and that is absolutely fine. My last one I'm going to do is the middle, and it looks like, oh my goodness, they might get so close that they almost overlap. But if I line it up correctly to the vanishing point, I get that tiny little space in between. Now you might end up with squares that actually do overlap, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. If you look at the drawing on the back of my paper, my squares were a little closer together, so this back corner actually crashes into that square and it just stops instead of going all the way to the vanishing point, and that is absolutely fine. Now this is pretty much where we're going to stop today. Our first part of next week is going to be tracing over these lines with our black colored pencil. So if you wanted to work on that today, you are welcome to, but we are going to hold off on the coloring and the value part of this drawing until part 2 of this project. During part 2, we will finish up whatever tracing you have. We will work on the best kinds of coloring techniques with our colored pencils or crayons, and we will start to practice some of those shading techniques and changing the values of a single coloring tool just by changing how we color with it.